12. Sea Perils and Defeat. In Book 11, Odysseus and his men visit the underworld where the shades or spirits of the dead reside. During Odysseus's visit there, the spirit of the prophet Tiresias warns him that death and destruction will follow unless he and his crew act with restraint and control. Tiresias then reveals what Odysseus must do on his return to Ithaca. Odysseus also speaks with the spirit of his mother, who died of grief because Odysseus was away for so long. Odysseus and his men then leave the underworld and return to Circe's island. While his men sleep, Circe takes Odysseus aside to hear about the underworld and to offer advice. Then said the lady Circe, "So all those trials are over. Listen with care to this now, and a god will arm your mind. Square in your ship's path are the sirens, crying beauty to bewitch men coasting by. Woe to the innocent who hears that sound. He will not see his lady nor his children in joy crowding about him home from sea. The sirens will sing his mind away on their sweet meadow lulling. There are bones of dead men rotting in a pile beside them, and flayed skins shrivel around the spot. Steer wide, keep well to seaward, plug your oarsmen's ears with beeswax kneaded soft. None of the rest should hear that song. But if you wish to listen, let the men tie you in the lugger, hand and foot, back to the mast, lashed to the mast, so you may hear those harpies' thrilling voices. Shout as you will, begging to be untied, your crew must only twist more line around you, and keep their stroke up, till the singers fade. What then? One of two courses you may take, and you yourself must weigh them. I shall not plan the whole action for you now, but only tell you both. Ahead are beetling rocks, and dark blue glancing amphitrite surging roars around them. Prowling rocks, or drifters, the gods in bliss have named them well. Not even birds can pass them by. A second course lies between headlands. One is a sharp mountain piercing the sky with storm clouds round the peak, dissolving never, not in the brightest summer, to show heaven's azure there, nor in the fall. No mortal man could scale it, nor so much as land there, not with 20 hands and feet. So sheer the cliffs are, as of polished stone. Midway that height, a cavern full of mist opens to Eurybus and evening. Skirting this is the lugger, great Odysseus, your master bowman, shooting from the deck, would come short of the cave mouth with his shaft. But that is the den of Scylla, where she yaps abominably, and newborn whelps cry. Though she is huge and monstrous, God or man, no one could look on her in joy. Her legs, and there are 12, are like great tentacles, unjointed, and upon her serpent necks are borne 6 heads like nightmares of ferocity, with triple serried rows of fangs and deep gullets of black death. Half her length, she sways her heads in air outside her horrid cleft, hunting the sea around that promontory for dolphins, dogfish, or what bigger game thundering amphitrite feeds in thousands, and no ship's company can claim to have passed her without loss and grief. She takes from every ship 1 man for every gullet. The opposite point seems a more tongue of land you'd touch with a good bow shot at the Narrows. A great wild fig, a shady mass of leaves, grows on it, and Charybdis lurks below to swallow down the dark sea tide. 3 times from dawn till dusk she spews it up and sucks it down again 3 times, a whirling maelstrom. If you come upon her then, the god who makes earth tremble could not save you. No, hug the cliff of Scylla, take your ship through on racing stroke. Better to warn 6 men than lose them all, and the ship too. So Odysseus has gone based on Circe's advice. In book 10, he went to the underworld where he got some advice from Tiresias, who is a prophet who lives in the underworld. And now he's back with Circe, and she's giving him some further advice on how to complete the next part of his journey. So she's telling him that basically there's only one route you can take, because as you move forward in your journey, you're going to come across basically a big wall that they can't like climb over, a big think of it as like an island with steep cliffs, and there's no way to climb over it. They can't even park their ship on the side of it. So basically, they're going to have to go through this cavern in order to come through to the other side. And as they're going, the first thing they're going to face are sirens, who are these creatures with a bird-like body and the tail of a mermaid. And they sing this song that all sailors are tempted by. And so if the men don't plug their ears with beeswax, as she recommends, they will row towards her or the sirens, and they will lure the men to their deaths. So she says that Odysseus can tie himself to the mast if he wants to hear the song, because she recognizes that he's curious and might want to hear it, but that the men need to plug their ears. And he's going to, as he goes, ask to be able to hear it. So he needs to advise his men to not untie him. After they've passed through the sirens and they reach this cavern, they are going to row past a monster named Scylla. Scylla is a monster with 6 heads, and Circe warns that Scylla will eat one man for every head. So basically, on this path, 6 men for sure are going to die as they pass her. And then when they've passed her, they are going to come upon Charybdis. And Charybdis is another monster. It is a whirlpool, and it is active 3 times a day. And what happens is it spews up a big geyser and then sucks it back down. So they just have to hope that Charybdis isn't active as they pass, because basically they're going to be rowing quickly to get past Scylla. And as they come upon Charybdis, they are going to need to get through without Charybdis being active, or their whole ship will get sucked down. So as Odysseus takes in this advice, it continues. So her advice ran, but I faced her, saying, "Only instruct me, goddess, if you will, how, if possible, can I pass Charybdis or fight off Scylla when she raids my crew?" Swiftly, that loveliest goddess answered me, "Must you have battle in your heart forever? The bloody toil of combat, old contender, will not yield to the immortal gods. The nightmare cannot die. Being eternal evil itself, horror and pain and chaos, there is no fighting her. No power can fight her, and all that avails is fight. Lose headway there along the rock face while you break out arms, and she'll swoop over you, I fear, once more, taking one man again for every gullet. No, no, put your back into it, row on, invoke blind force that bore the scourge of men to keep her from a second strike against you." So Circe is warning. Odysseus says, "Well, how can I fight her? I don't want to lose any men." And Circe says, "You need to be humble. You can't fight her. And if you pause in order to pull out your weapons and attempt to fight her, she's just going to eat more men." So once they have passed Scylla and Charybdis, Circe explains, they will coast Thrynxia, the island where Helios's cattle graze, fine herds and flocks of goodly sheep. The herds and flocks are 7 with 50 beasts in each. No lambs are dropped or calves, and these fat cattle never die. Immortal too their cowards are, their shepherds, Phestia and Lampetia, sweetly braided nymphs that divine Neaera bore to the overlord of high noon, Helios. These nymphs their gentle mother bred and placed upon Thrynxia, the distant land, in care of flocks and cattle for her father. Now give these kine a wide berth. Keep your thoughts intent upon your course for home, and hard seafaring brings you all to Ithaca. But if you raid the beeves, I see destruction for ship and crew. Rough years then lie between you and your homecoming, alone and old, the one survivor, all companions lost. So the last piece of advice Circe is giving here is that once they've passed Scylla and Charybdis, hopefully safely, they're going to come upon the island where Helios lives. Helios is the sun himself. So if Apollo is god of the sun, Helios is the personified human version of the sun. And Helios has all of these immortal cattle that are his sort of prized possession. And so Circe warns Odysseus that if the men stop because they're hungry and they try to eat these cattle, then death and destruction will befall them. So the last thing they need to do is make sure that they don't eat the cattle, and then they will be home quickly. But if they do, things are not going to go well. And if you remember from the invocation, it mentions something around Helios and the cattle. So you kind of already know what's going to happen here. But Circe is giving him explicit orders not to let the men eat the cattle. So it continues. At dawn, Odysseus and his men continue their journey. Odysseus decides to tell the men only of Circe's warning about the sirens, whom they will soon encounter. He's fairly sure that they can survive this peril if he keeps their spirits up. Suddenly, the wind stops. The crew were on their feet briskly to furl the sail and stow it. Then, each in place, they poised the smooth oar blades and sent the white foam scudding by. I carved a massive cake of beeswax into bits and rolled them in my hands until they softened. No long task, for burning heat came down from Helios, lord of high noon. Going forward, I carried wax along the line and laid it thick in their ears. They tied me up then, plumb amidships, back to the mast, lashed to the mast, then took themselves again to rowing. Soon as we came smartly within hailing distance, the two sirens, noting our fast ship off their point, made ready, and they sang. The lovely voices and ardor pealing over the water made me crave to listen, and I tried to say, "Untie me," to the crew, jerking my brows, but they bent steady on the oars. Then Perempdes got to his feet, he and Eurylochus, and passed more line about to hold me still. So all rowed on until the sirens dropped under the sea rim and their singing dwindled away. My faithful company rested on their oars now, peeling the wax off that I had laid thick in their ears, then set me free. But scarcely had the island faded in blue air when I saw smoke and white water with sound of waves and tumult, a sound the men heard, and it terrified them. Oars flew from their hands, the blades went knocking wild alongside till the ship lost way, with no oar blades to drive her through the water. Well, I walked up and down from bow to stern, trying to put heart in them, standing over every oarsman, saying gently, "Friends, have we never been in danger before this? More fearsome is it now than when the Cyclops penned us in his cave? What power he had! But did I not keep my nerve and use my wits to find a way out for us? Now I say, by hook or crook, this peril too shall be something that we remember. Heads up, lads. We must obey the orders as I give them. Get the oar shafts in your hands and lie back hard on your benches. Hit these breaking seas. Zeus, help us pull away before we flounder. You at the tiller, listen and take in all that I say. The rudders are your duty. Keep her out of the combers and the smoke. Steer her for that headland. Watch the drift, and we fetch up in the smother and you drown us." That was all, and it brought them round into action. But as I sent them on towards Scylla, I told them nothing, as they could do nothing. They would have dropped their oars again in panic, to roll for cover under the decking. Circe's bidding against arms had slipped my mind, so I tried on my cuirass and took up 2 heavy spears, then made my way along to the foredeck, thinking to see her first from there, the monster of the gray rock, harboring torment from my friends. I strained my eyes upon that cliffside veiled in cloud, but nowhere could I catch sight of her. And all this time, in travail, sobbing, gaining on the current, we rowed into the strait, Scylla to port, and on our starboard beam Charybdis, dire gorge of salt sea tide. By heaven, when she vomited, all the sea was like a cauldron, seething over intense fire, when the mixture suddenly heaves and rises. The shot spume soared to the landslide heights and fell like rain. But when she swallowed the sea water down, we saw the funnel of maelstrom, heard the rock bellowing all around, and dark sand raged on the bottom far below. My men all blanched against the gloom, our eyes were fixed upon that yawning mouth in fear of being devoured. Then Scylla made her strike, whisking 6 of my best men from the ship. I happened to glance aft at ship and oarsmen and caught sight of their arms and legs dangling high overhead. Voices came down at me in anguish, calling my name for the last time. A man surf casting on a point of rock for bass or mackerel, whipping his long rod to make the sinker and the bait far out, will hook a fish and rip it from the surface to dangle, wriggling through the air. So these were borne aloft in spasms toward the cliff. She ate them as they shrieked there in her den, in her dire grapple, reaching still for me, and deathly pity ran me through at that sight, far the worst I ever suffered, questing the passes of the strange sea. We rowed on, the rocks were now behind, Charybdis too, and Scylla dropped astern. Odysseus tries to persuade his men to bypass Thyrencia, the island of the sun god Helios, but they insist on landing. Driven by hunger, they ignore Odysseus's warnings not to feast on Helios's cattle. This disobedience angers the sun god, who threatens to stop shining if payment is not made for the loss of his cattle. To appease Helios, Zeus sends down a thunderbolt to sink Odysseus's ship. Odysseus alone survives. He eventually drifts to Ugaea, the home of Calypso, who keeps him on her island for 7 years. With this episode, Odysseus ends the telling of his tale to King Alcinous. So last thought here. So Odysseus and his men are able to make it past the Sirens and Scylla and Charybdis. As they're rowing towards into this cavern, they see that Charybdis is spewing right then. So they kind of just narrowly miss getting devoured by Charybdis. And then only 6 men die because Odysseus follows Circe's advice. However, when they get to the other side and they've passed these monsters, they end up stopping at Helios's island, where the men can't help themselves and they eat the cattle. So Zeus then sinks the ship, and Odysseus is now alone. He has no crew, he has no ship, and he has found himself on the island of Calypso. We don't read the story of Odysseus's time with Calypso, but it's important to note that he spent 7 years there. So far on his journey home, which we know ultimately takes him 10 years, he spends 1 year with Circe and 7 with Calypso, and then the other 2 would be his adventures with Polyphemus and the Lotus Eaters, and just being out at sea. So now we are going into the end of the story, and the next section you're going to read about Odysseus's homecoming. And just remember that at this point he is all alone. Everyone of his crewmates have perished and his boat is destroyed.